Welcome to the Samuele Tini Show, where business, innovation, and sustainability converge to drive progress. Are you ready to uncover solutions shaping our future? Let's dive in.
Welcome to a new episode. And today I'm very thrilled to have on the show Alisa Sydow, who is a returning guest. She has been with us before presenting her work, but she has grown very famous. Now she's on the radar of things. She has done extensive research. So I said, let's have back a change maker who is making headlines. So I'm very pleased to have again Alisa here with us, who, for the people who have not seen, is a professor of entrepreneurship at the ESCP Business School in London. Alisa, it's such a pleasure having you today again.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. I'm always happy to join and discuss a couple of things.
Alisa, we will discuss a lot about your recent research about women, entrepreneurship, the digital space in Africa. But before that, can you give us a bit of your background and then how you have become also, your biggest achievement of late?
It's always a kind of dangerous to say to a professor, just give us a little bit of background, because it might turn up that they start talking for 20 minutes and everyone just starts to fall asleep. So if that happens, just let me know and interrupt me. My journey has been interesting, and I'm mainly driven by the fact that I'm really passionate about unlocking the potential of entrepreneurship, especially in emerging markets. And right from the start, or in other words, it was basically the reason why I decided to do a PhD back then in 2015 was exactly that I wanted to better understand what's happening in entrepreneurship. How can entrepreneurship be like a real solution and path forward if we want to support economies to build up, to grow, and to really start having a strong economical situation. Based on my PhD, I was really focusing much on Kenya, Nairobi, and then extending it a little bit more towards South Africa. But I need to say that more recently, I'm actually very interested in Latin America as well, because I can actually see more and more that there are some similarities. And I think geographically speaking, they're so far away. So most of the times also the community and connections between entrepreneurs from those different regions are not at all established. But with me and having the luck and the beautiful thing of having the opportunity to travel a lot, I can see that there are some synergies. So that's kind of my current status quo where I'm at, to not move away from the African context, but kind of extending it to Latin America as well, to ensure that, or improve even more, that my insights that I do with my research are helping even more people, more entrepreneurs to really unlock the potential that is already there. Yeah. And by doing that, of course, as you said, I'm also a professor. So yes, it's also about teaching entrepreneurs, and not only the research part, but let's say my real passion and focus is really on this more practical lens, and how to have my contribution on that. It's through the research, through the knowledge creation, and through the fact that I'm connected to a business school.
Fantastic, Alisa. And I really like what you said. Entrepreneurship is a way not to unlock potential growth, sustainable growth. That is what is happening, especially for emerging market where we are sitting now here in Kenya. It's really important, to really unlock entrepreneurship. And especially your work is based on and your recent work is based on women, the digital space and entrepreneurship space. So I was really fascinated by your reading your articles and work on how, women founders and the problem that women founders, especially in this part of the world, they have. So can you tell us a bit more about your research and your findings?
Of course. So let's start maybe with the reason why I believe that it's very important to specifically look at women founders in Africa, in Kenya, in Nairobi. And one of the reasons is, so I've been a lot of times in Nairobi, and I do qualitative research, which means basically I need to talk to founders. And if I do that, I've met a lot of wonderful women, and it was just kind of in my face that there are so many particularities, not only obstacles, because I really want to move away from this scenario of talking about what are the barriers, what are the obstacles. I think we are really at the point where we know how they are or what they are, not only in Nairobi, not only in Joburg, but honestly, this is most of the time something that you can apply to most of the cities, not only even in emerging markets. So we know those, but really looking at those particularities, things that makes them unique, different, because you can see with your eyes the difference between a male founder and a female founder, if we want to use this, let's say, gender lens. And so that was my triggering point where I said, okay, we need to have more research on that, because there are so many women that start their businesses because in a way it's, I don't want to say easy, but more feasible to start their businesses while having the kids, while maybe having also another job. And so you kind of can put it into your portfolio of different activities in order to start your own business. And yeah, so more recently, we have launched a UN collaboration with the community E-Trade for Women. And we have specifically looked at those female founders in the digital economy to better understand like how they are building up their businesses, how are they able to grow, what are their kind of unique recipes and success factors, which has been very, very interesting.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to just go subsequently this. Which are the most surprising findings that you have uncovered, during your research here in Kenya?
So if I'm very honest, let's say 60% of the insights that we had were mainly confirming in the way that, yes, we know that those are the obstacles, those are the challenges, but also the fact that women are in a very strong way, very much resilient. I mean, this is nothing new. We all in a way know it, but what has been very surprising is that one of the things which I have always admired is that the motivation to start the businesses for most of the women, and they can be in the digital economy, but even if they're not, is that they want to contribute to the society, to the community, to the family. So there is a strong motivation because they see a problem, or on their own, they have personally suffered from a problem. They want to solve it, not only for themselves, not only for making money, but actually for creating a better impact for the society. And this, of course, is something that is amazing, because in 2026, more than ever, we need those type of founders that do not only think about the economic part while starting a business. However, what we have seen is that this very strong purpose is actually one of the reasons why they're not able to grow as much as they could. Because sometimes the impact lens, or the wish to create an impact, to create positive change, is actually making them blind to understand when it's more important to focus on the business side, what makes sense, how can I make money, how do I get more investors. To make it very clear, there was one example, one of the founders that we have interviewed, she shared with us that looking back, she understood that there was a moment in time where she said no to an investor investing in her business, because the investors were asking her to move away from her initial positioning and creating an impact and having a more commercial based, let's say, business model. In that moment, she was so focused on saying like, no, for me, this impact is more important. I do not want to change anything in order to get that money from the investors. So she declined it. Looking backwards and while we were talking, she said that was such a mistake. She has suffered afterwards, but she has learned a lot out of it, because she said, if I harm my business side, there will never ever be an impact. So she understood that in order to create that impact, she can not neglect the business side of it. And I think this is very, very important. And we have seen it throughout different interviews that most of the time, not most of the times, but there are situations when they need to make a call, a decision, where this wish and emotional, let's say, attachment to say, like, I want to create impact is actually really neglecting or making them blind to see, like, now in this present moment, what's the best for my business in order to make revenues, to grow, to have sales, and then you can start thinking about all the other things.
And I think it's very interesting. It's usually attention, no? Sometimes that you have to trade and balance. Sometimes I think is also maybe some businesses or many businesses started maybe as an accelerator or apps or NGOs, projects. So there is this strong also focus, no? Say impact, internet, and funding. But if you want to really have a long lasting business, then you don't have to neglect profit, and you don't have to neglect also your commercial sides. Otherwise, you will never have an impact. And maybe I can ask you that question. Have you seen that? So do you see can be a role for people, for example, speaking like me, that I work at the grassroots, I support women, businesses, and farmers to start their own business. How do you can also help them just to understand that it's important to have this social impact lens, but also not to rely too much on support, and also having this focus for sustainability to really make the business thriving rather than just, a small part that will never able to scale.
That is a very, very good question. And unfortunately, I think the answer is not that easy, because there is not one exercise that you can do with them and it makes click and they see like, oh, no, of course, I only focus on my business side, economic side of it. Fine, I got your message. That's not really how things are. What we can see, and this is more theory driven, is that most of the times the example I just shared is just the evidence, is the behavior. But this behavior comes from something inside. And this insight is how you perceive yourself. And having this attitude to say business comes first is something very much connected to, you have the founder identity. You have this identity as an entrepreneur. You're a businesswoman, a businessman. You want to make business. And I can see in a lot of cases with women that I've spoken over the past 10 years that they really struggle to identify themselves as the leader, as the entrepreneur, as the founder to make money. And one example also for this is, if you start an interview, it not happens all the time, but it happens every now and then. You introduce yourself and the things that they are sharing is, hello, I'm, let's say, Maria. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm an aunt, I'm a and I'm a founder. So even in the role, first it comes to family and all the roles and identities they have within their family, in the community. And then towards the end, they're mentioning, I'm a founder. However, the context in which they are is they're interviewed because they have a business. And this is already kind of showing the priority that they have in their mind in terms of what role, which identity comes first for me. And I think the real struggle is because there are so many layers of those female identities that women have, specifically in Nairobi and in other African countries, is that there are so many and so many different roles they need to fulfill, so many also expectations they need to fulfill, that it's very hard to actually say, now business comes first. Coming back to your question, how can you do that? It is actually working on those identity topics. And most of the times, if I give them the example I have just shared with how they introduce themselves, if I tell them that later, they actually realize like, whoa, you're right. How comes? Because they're doing it subconsciously. So it's really about clarifying and giving them kind of a mirror in specific situations so that they can reflect on how they behave and where it comes from. Because it only can start by reflection and kind of starting to say like, no, this is not what I want to do. I want to have my business first because this is important, because if I say this as my priority, actually all the rest comes later, and I can, through my business, I can create that impact and I can fulfill the roles that I want to have in the society and community.
Thank you, Alisa. It's really interesting to see it from this lens, because it's true. When you it's actually undermining rather than reinforcing, if I have understood you correctly, this way. Because if you instead focus on the business, you will reinforce your other identities. Why you focus too much on the others, then you undermine your business and your choices that you do there. And a subsequent question, one of the problem that we, especially founders, women founders, especially, it's the finance and the role of finance, and how this can really unlock, and support them to not only have the impact that they want, but also to thrive. So how finance can be practical in this, teaching in a way the support and the work that is needed and also how we can unlock, and this is a subsequent question, more funding, especially for women in this context.
We just have started to kind of say from an internal perspective, like what the female founders can do differently and change in order to be maybe more ready. And I think continuing this lens, if we focus on what can women do without waiting others to help them or assist them to change, is to really focus on having ambitious goals and presenting yourself in the pitch deck and in the interviews, or not interviews, in the meetings that you have with investors or business angels in a way as they expect to. I'm not saying that they should change and kind of behave like male founders coming from the US, like this kind of stereotype thinking about founders, but I mean, understand how the game is played. If you like it or not, but if you are committed to, you want to fundraise XYZ, understand how the market works and then adapt to it and get to your goal. Once you are in that position that you got all the things that you need in order to grow your business, then you can start thinking about how can I change the system. But it's very difficult to change the system if you're not even completely part of it. So first get part of it. And then it's about finding a way how you feel it's still you, but at the same time, you're also playing along the rules of the game. So this is a rather short-term, let's say, possible solution or way what women can do now without waiting others to change. However, of course, I'm also a big supporter of saying like we need a system that needs to be more in favor for women and others. I mean, it's just about minor or different founders that are not kind of part of this category that is coming from the US stereotype of fundraising and startuppers. And I think in this case, I'm coming back to the point that it's in the end, who is deciding to invest when we are talking to VCs or business angels? They are people, individuals. Even if you go to a bank, it's an individual looking at your case and filling out the form with you. So we can have a lot of regulations because we can see it again also in Nairobi that regulations are in place. It should be equal access and so on. But last year, when we presented our UN report, we had a wonderful event with 80 female founders in Nairobi. And part of the stories that they exchanged is that still in 2025, women were asking for a loan in the end if their husband is fine with her getting a loan and asking for a loan in a bank. This is nothing that is legally correct, but it's still lived and used. So if we really want to see changes, it's not enough to have policies. We need to get to the point where the policies are used and people follow those policies. And that's why I'm saying, like, in the end, they're all individuals. So we really need to have a way how to train them, how to educate them, that the ones that are sitting in the role and having the power to decide about who is getting which type of funding, yes or no, has really the right skill set to be able to understand who deserves the funding and who not. Not following just simple categories that are coming from another continent where things are completely different. So in this case, I think the only way how to get there is about creating awareness, attention, and you can only do that through training, talking, conversations. And yes, it's going back to the point that we need to have a bigger audience if we talk about female founder related topics, which of course is still challenging because whenever you have an event that is with the title female founders, most of the times you don't see any male participant in the audience.
Thank you, Alisa. A lot of food for thought and very interesting discussion. And I want to go back to what you mentioned, the event that you had, the 80 women. And I want to ask you, we know that the power of storytelling. So can you share with us really a story from one of those founders that you have interviewed that really touched you and gave you, and which lesson learned you had from our journey?
Ooh, this is a very difficult one because there's so many different stories of women that I have in mind, and each one is unique, which is also kind of the beauty of it. One example which I can share that I really like because it's showing a certain level of resilience, and I feel like it's a very kind of common case in Nairobi. So we're not only kind of cherry picking the super success stories, but kind of the ordinary ones. She's a good friend of mine, and she works in the interior design business, working with wood and other elements, having also more kind of fashion items such as bags, etc. And one of the stories why what I like, and it's kind of adding also another layer to what I shared before with the findings, is that she's very passionate about building up her business. She, at the same time, also has her family, so she's coping with all the different things, but she really kind of came out of doing something completely on her own, up to having 10, 12, 13 employees and artisans that she is working with. But the story that I like, because she has learned a lot around it, is when it comes to exporting. And I can see it so many times that, especially if they have a product like a wonderful bag, like a wonderful piece of furniture or other interior design, one of the things that you always believe, if things are so difficult here in Nairobi, the market is too small, there are not enough customers, you think about, if we're getting abroad, things are getting better. So there is kind of a tendency to believe, let's start exporting, because that might actually help me to have another source of revenues and a new market that's bigger than Nairobi. And what has happened in her case is through friends, because they have been, I think, somewhere in Europe. I don't remember exactly which country. They said, you know what, we just moved there. I believe it would be wonderful to sell your products here. Give me a few products from yours and let's start selling them. She did all of that. And of course, all the story, and she can tell it better than me, all the story behind understanding how to get into exporting, how to get everything ready with the files and ship everything. It was very challenging and time consuming. She did it, realizing in the end that nothing got sold. So after 5, 6, 7 months, they decided things are not working. And so instead of having an extra source of revenues, she actually even had an extra layer of cost, because she needed to find a way how to get the products even back to Nairobi. And during the event, she has shared that example and her experience, because she really said she was too naive. She had no clue about like how things are really working. It was like an unplanned way of starting exporting just because there is an opportunity. But she said, only because there are opportunities, you can't be blind. You need to have a more strategic point of view and understanding like what I need to invest in time, money. Is it really worth towards kind of the potential that this new market might have? And she did not at all any calculation around that. She just kind of threw herself into this, let's start exporting. It sounds like a wonderful opportunity. Let's get it ready. And for her, this was a very, very big lesson, which made her kind of focus again more on the Nairobi market, expats, tourists, and understanding how she can kind of fully exploit the local market before starting another round of exporting.
Thank you, Alisa. Another incredible example. I know many of those stories. Let's find greener pastures outside, while it's not always greener out there.
I have a question to you as well,
Yeah.
because I'm really asking myself, because if can say it very openly, I can't hear it anymore. This kind of assumption again and again from founders, especially because if I travel to Nairobi, I'm coming from London, I'm coming from Milan or somewhere. And so there is always the question about like, how are markets there? I want to export. What can we do? Why is there such a strong assumption and willingness to believe that the only way to scale your business is exporting to the European or US market, not even within Africa, which I think is a completely different scenario?
I think two things. One is maybe the purchasing power, that they are assumed to be bigger. The other one is also trade barriers. That is the biggest problem within inter-African countries, that sometimes is more difficult to cross a border than up to a plane and go to Europe. And I've done it many times. I'm sure you have done it many times. The third one, I think, is also there are a lot of barriers and regulations, and sometimes what we can call it academically voids, different type of voids that there are in those markets. I read some research, so that sometimes feel that a broad market might be easier in to be tackled because sometimes I'm thinking about, for example, resources like or like commodities like coffees and others. When you discuss with farmers, they tell me, there's cartels, there is licenses, there is issues, there is for some product there is a sort of monopsony or close to monopsony in buying in local markets. So they always want, let's go out, which can be an interesting area, but should be planned well. It's not immediate. And on the other side, I think is also the need also, to structure internal demand. Thinking about coffee, that is one of the value chains I'm working. So I'm sharing also some part. I think the coffee culture in Kenya is growing, but still is mainly export. But I think there is huge untapped opportunity also to tackle, the local markets. It usually was a bit seen as the lower grade and lower quality. While now I think it's really improving and it's really changing a bit. So I would say a mixture of three things. One is barriers and voids that are still there. The second one is also maybe this perceived part that the purchasing power are higher, so returns are higher, so quick money, quick returns. And the third one, I think, is also a stumbling block of the on how to enlarge the market and how you make sure that you can tap fast your neighbors country or neighboring country rather than just thinking US or Canada or I don't know where, Japan. So I think those three mainly, but then there are even others. I don't know if there sounds with you.
Definitely, definitely. The only thing that I always share and highlight and stress so much to founders is at the same time, it's true that the market slash purchasing power in Europe or the US might be higher, but there's competition. You're not the only one. And so most of the times the products are not ready because there is no market. Even if there is a market in terms of there are people having a certain purchasing power, yes, but they also are overwhelmed with fashion items, beauty products, coffees. I mean, the markets are full. So yes, if you want to exploit that purchasing power, true, but then again, you need to have a very, very strategic mindset and understanding what's the local market, how are the positioning, how I can position myself with the product portfolio that I have to have something unique and to be different from what is already in the market. And this step is missing because, the markets are full. And that's always something that I really try to share and get into the mind of most of the founders, not to scare them, but just to kind of say like how reality is.
Yeah, in fact, and then is also, and there is also an untapped opportunity to work with the local markets which are growing at a very higher pace. And there is a huge propension to consumption, especially in growing countries, not only in Kenya, but in the neighboring, which could be also better posed and easier if also some regulation support is given. And going to that, Alisa, I want to ask if you can give us maybe many of the founders maybe they are listening and say yes, but then what we can do, can you give us some three practical like a sort of three lessons from Alisa, let's say moves that somebody and especially a woman founder can do to really grow with confidence and avoid mistakes?
Yes, definitely. Not sure if I have three, but I would definitely start with one. No, one. And this one for me is just the baseline and the most important one, which is focus on having a strong, unique, and powerful product or service. So, what you offer, what you produce, what you create needs to have a value for a specific customer segment. So, what you produce needs to have a value, a big value for someone in the market. Because in the end, if you have a product or service that is solving a problem, suffer from a certain kind of group of people, they don't care about if you are a woman or not. They don't care about where you come from. They want to buy your product or your service. They want to get it. So I think a lot of the problems that we have discussed, or the issues around female founders and entrepreneurship, there might be actually also be already resolved just by having such a strong product offer and business model that you make money. Because at the same time, if you market for it, because you're serving something that no one else did before, and there is a suffer, there is a problem, then you're able to get revenues, because there are people that want to buy it and pay for it in order to get your product or your service. And if that happens, you have revenues. So turning it into a business model that is actually growing, it is interesting, and then there's a market for it. So all the topic that we had before in terms of, oh, female founders, they don't get investors on board. I mean, investors that want to make money, if they see that there is a strong business model, they don't care again about who you are and where you come from. Probably. I mean, if you have the traction about, you have strong evidence that you have a strong business. So I think another way to overcome a lot of the challenges, or even in a way avoid them, is take your time and understand what you actually offer and what you produce. And not only because you're passionate, not only because for you it was a problem and now you have a solution. I mean, is there a real market for it? And how you can be unique. The second for me is more on a personal level, let's say less connected to building up a business and kind of the journey of a founder. It's more about find a way that you're not getting exhausted, because especially in a context such as Nairobi and as a woman, I've seen and heard it so many times that the expectations that those women have on their own, but also the society has, there are just so many. And one of them in an interview shared, you know what, women in Africa, they don't own their time. And I will never ever forget this quote and this interview, because it is true. And so there will never ever be enough time. But the problem is also, if you are not fine, if you are not feeling well, your business will not grow. And so again, in order to ensure that you can create the impact you want, you can fulfill the roles that you want, you need to have your battery at a certain level. And so another kind of strong suggestion that I have, trying to find ways step by steps that women understand how they can kind of ensure that their battery is always at a level that is good for them, good for their business, and good for the things they want to do, which is challenging because they don't own their time. So a lot of situations, they can't decide on what they can do. They just need to perform. I think you asked me for 3, but I think those 2 are for me the biggest and most important ones.
I think those one are very important advice, and I've seen many of those, and also some women told me the same, more or less the same sentence when we interview on the field and others. So it's really an important one. And the first point, I cannot agree more. Sometimes, especially, is also the fault. I've seen it many projects and others. They take half-baked products and then say there is a lot of hype, discussion. So you really need to have a product that is working. Of course, you can be scaled fast to market and all of that, a minimum viable product, but you need to refine it very well and then give value. If you don't give value at the end of the day, even if you get a lot of funding, your runway will be finished.
And maybe to add on that, just if you allow me, is it's also important to understand in a way which type of business you want to build, because it's very different also what you are searching in terms of the product and offer you want to have. If you want to go into a startup, scaling fast, talking to investors, I mean, this is one thing. Then you really want to have a big market. So it needs to be something very unique, or you're a copycat because you have seen something outside and you apply it into a new context. But I mean, entrepreneurship is so much more. So someone can also build up a bakery. A bakery, I mean, we both agree, is not something new. We have bakeries all the time. But if you're in a specific area, you have understood your local market and you found again in this market a niche where you can start by having a certain offer and different type of bakery, you can start. And in this case, probably you never want to talk to investors, but you can start step by step, organically, on your own. And this is entrepreneurship as well. So figure out which road you want to go. I see that sometimes someone is in the category of, I want to start a bakery, but I'm talking to investors because maybe that's the only way I'll get money. Then it becomes really challenging because you are kind of somewhere in the middle, but not really focused on doing the one thing. So more clarity also on that helps in order to kind of fulfill the first suggestion I have shared.
There is, I think, a bias, if I may add this in investors and also projects, call for proposal, anything they want. Let me put it this way: sexy, startups and things, the digital, the ads, the like the Silicon Valley or others. Why also entrepreneurship is not only that, but are also something that work in more traditional fields and can have the same, if not more, impact. So sometimes it's also maybe an external push that also pulls in that direction. That sometimes it's put a lot of pressure, on people.
But this is coming again through, how can I say it, a misleading approach of international aid, because most of the times those projects are coming because they are funded by certain NGOs or non-governmental or governmental institutions. Most of the times, or they do know the context or they don't know the context. I usually assume they don't know really the context. And so only because there is something trendy, as you said before, they believe now, okay, let's make another call for the next startup in agri-tech. Wonderful, but how many do we need to have? And it's kind of giving also a certain direction for founders in the market that they really believe like this is the only way to go. But it's not. It's really not. So that's why kind of going back to one of your very first questions, the background of myself and the reason why I study what I study is exactly that. I'm really fed up with this, how much money we are putting into this international development, but I'm not sure how much value we actually create if we think about the value for the local economies and the local entrepreneurs.
And thank you so much, Alisa, for this wonderful episode and a wonderful insight and sharing really, down to earth and really focused insights that really touch the reality that we see many, many times. I cannot agree more on your last question. Sometimes some of these international aid and calls have done more harm than good, especially for in the local market. So thank you so much, Alisa, for this episode and sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thanks again.
Fantastic. And we look forward to having you now, not only on the radar of the 50 thinkers, but now, the fully fledged. And really, I would like to see more of your research in the future. Thank you so much.
Of course. Let's keep in touch.
Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.